Well, thank you very much. So look, I want to begin by setting some context before bringing in Vernon. And the context is to take us back. We have to go back, really, to the late 1940s and the 1950s. And we have to summon up that generation that came to this country, the Windrush beginning the journey, but many, many boats coming. My dad came in 1956 on the SS Luciana, which sort of bounced around the Caribbean, picking up groups of people, and then docked at Genoa, and then they came up by train to Southampton. But many people came, and it's important, I think, to summon up the context in which those people arrived. Mike, when did you come?
I came on the 3rd day of January 1956. Same year as your father.
How old were you?
I was just 14, I think, or maybe younger. The thing is, I don't remember all that much. What I remember is the way that everything looked. And what's interesting to me is that nowadays, nothing looks the same. I remember, because I went to school the day after I arrived.
Wow.
And,
Where?
Highbury. But I remember walking to school, and this was in the autumn, later on, but seeing the smoke starting from the chimneys, and you looked in the sky, and all over there's plumes of smoke going up, and it's hard now to
summon up the 1950s London.
Yeah, to imagine that, you know. But there are a lot of other things. I mean, I'm going to talk about personal memories. I remember sitting in front of a heater like that, you know, everything was so damn cold. And, you know, the front of my body was overheating. So it was really, really hot because I was up to this heater like this, and my back was freezing. It was, and that's the thing, it was very strange in every way.
Yes.
When I first arrived, we lived in Bolspan Road, and there was a blacksmith in Bolspan Road, and I used to stand there looking at him shoeing the horses. Again, you know, it's not a London you can imagine.
Yes.
From looking at it now.
Yes. Vernon.
That's absolutely amazing. I came to the United Kingdom April 1962 and ended up in just off Bolspan Road. Burder Road. We lived at Burder Road off Bolspan Road. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I know it well.
And I was conceived in 1972 on Victoria Terrace, which isn't far from Ball Pond. Carry on. Go on.
And it was, I tell you what, I bet it wasn't as cold when you came as when I came. Because I came April 62, and you'll find it one of the coldest winters in history of the country. So you can imagine. But I was only 6 years of age, and you know, when you're young, you don't really feel the cold that much.
By 62, I've met people who came in the early 60s from Jamaica, and you were coming from Jamaica.
Yes.
And they had begun to fly on BOAC Airlines, as it was then known. Did you fly, or did you come by boat?
Yes, we came by plane.
Yeah.
And I'll say the weather was gloomy, it was dark. I'd always said that we came in December because it was so cold when I came, the weather was gloomy, etc., etc. We used to have long periods of darkness, but anyhow, from Ballston Road, Burner Road, we moved to St Anne's Road.
Yes, I know St Anne's.
There was me, my mum, my brother and 3 sisters to join my father, who was already here, who had worked and saved up money to send the rest of us from Jamaica. I remember it was very pleasant as far as I was concerned.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school at first when I was 7. I went to Stamford Hill Junior School, just off Bartrey Road. From Stamford Hill, I went to Marfield, which became Drayton Comprehensive. And after Drayton, it became Bladesmore, which is now Bladesmore.
Mike, I just want you to reflect a bit on that generation of people. So what we're talking about are older people, but I mean not old, but 20s, 30s, coming for a life. What we're talking about are children, you 14, Vernon 6, often coming to join family, and this juxtaposition of the Caribbean, wherever you've come from, whether it's Guyana or Jamaica, or Barbados, or St Lucia, or Trinidad, the list goes on, or Antigua, so we didn't leave anybody out, and Britain at that time. And when you look back and you say, look, it's changed so much, and when you talked about heat, I was thinking about growing up, the things that strike me that people just do not understand, and I remember this, is growing up with an outside toilet, which people now, we've been an outside toilet, but that was absolutely common, and growing up with paraffin heaters, because this is before central heating. So cold really felt cold. But what do you think, I mean, obviously what you hear, particularly from those who were coming as adults, is this powerful sense of coming to the motherland, and this powerful sense of expectation about the Caribbean. And when we talk about the if you like, the pull to come to work, obviously on things like underground NHS, often people don't understand what people were leaving behind, because right across the Caribbean at that time was quite high unemployment after the war. So just set us some context.
Well, that was extraordinary, because everyone you can talk to about why they left, they're very conscious, and they're very conscious of leaving in order, what we say, to better themselves. People were very aware that they would have better chances outside of the Caribbean. It didn't mean that they hated the place, or they were desperate to leave in that sense. But they knew that there were things that they could get from being in the outside world. And it isn't, I'd like to make this point, that we're not necessarily talking about money or better wages or whatever. That wasn't it. People thought about education, for instance. People thought actually about meeting different people.
It was said at the time that the streets of London was paved with gold.
We didn't used to say that. The blasted newspapers used to say they think the streets of London are paved with gold, but I mean, we weren't that stupid. You know, it was when people talked about it. To me, they talked about the chances of improving yourself. It's often forgotten that we came from what were essentially very small communities.
Actually, when you speak to people, the vast majority of people who were coming from very rural areas of the Caribbean. So the way I put it is it was a simple life. It was a much simpler life, and they were coming to much more complex environments because the vast majority were not moving from the rural Caribbean to Shropshire or the Malvern Hills. They were moving to London and Birmingham and to metropolitan areas.
Don't forget that there was also the element of the servicemen who had been here throughout the war, gone back, you know, for one reason or another, and then
Come back for a better life. Yeah, thank you. Of course, coming at 7 and ending up at what was then Drayton, what is now Gladesmore, and experiencing the British school system. And of course, there's also an element of experiencing, both in terms of schooling, and I suspect, but you tell me, Vernon, in terms of attitudes of the authorities, the police and others, as we run into the late 60s, into the 70s, we start to meet another story that is part of the Windrush. And that is a story that's a bittersweet story. It's a story of both a first and second generation finding Britain problematic, finding it hard to find a place, ending up in trouble with the police. As we go into the late 70s, 80s, we get riots, New Crossfire, those sorts of stories. Where do you place yourself in that? Did you fare well because of the boxing? You tell me.
Well, I say from Drayton, I don't know for what reason, but I used to end up in lots of fights, you know, with other children, other pupils.
Were you cheeky? Was it race? What was it? Why did you end up in fights? It's just how it was in the 70s?
Just how it was, you know, it was easy to get into fights. I had loads of fights in school playgrounds, etc.
You weren't big.
No, I was never big, but I would find people twice my size, you know, and I'd often end up the winner, not the loser, you know. So they introduced schoolboy boxing, and I decided to give it a try. And then I decided to join a boxing club. It was called the British Legion at the time, High Cross.
Yeah. And did you find a community in boxing? You were good at boxing. You could excel at boxing.
Yes, and you know, it taught me a lot of discipline. Where I was, because I must admit, I got into quite a few scrapes with the police after leaving school because of the fighting. So the boxing directed that energy into a proper channel, you know. And after losing a competition to the, I think it was 1972 Olympic champion, Olympic captain of the British boxing team, I decided to turn professional because, let's say, I was a relative novice and I put up a really good performance against the Olympic captain. So people started whispering in my ear saying, why don't you go pro, and blah, blah, blah. So I did this, turned professional. But unfortunately, the manager that I had, he wasn't a very good manager. He came to my house the day before a contest was due to take place, said he was in trouble, he needed me to help him out, could I fight tomorrow? Can you imagine somebody making a professional debut and they give him a 1 day notice for a fight? I took the fight, lost the fight on points, but it was a relatively good performance. And the week after that, I was scheduled officially to fight Eric Perkins from Battersea at York Hall, Bethnal Green, and I fought him and won the contest. And then my career just started. I started winning and winning and winning and winning.
And this is through the 70s or 80s?
This is 70s,
70s,
into
yeah.
early 80s.
70s into early 80s.
Yes. And I went 11 fights unbeaten.
Did you make any money?
Not a great deal. Not a great deal. But I made some. It was respectable at the time.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it wasn't a fortune.
Yeah.
I had.
Did it keep you out of? You'd said that you'd previously, you'd been getting into a few scrapes with the police. Did you see the boxing as? Did it keep you away from some of the problems that were happening for other youth at that time?
Absolutely, it steered me in the right direction.
What was the story? Would you say for your friends at that time? What was there? I mean, it was a period. Also, it's important to say. I'll bring you in again, Mike. It was a period. It was a period where you could leave school at that time. One of the other problems was that many black children were not being put in for the old O-level. They were being put in for what was called the CSE exam. But it was a period where you could get a job. You could find an apprentice, you could get a job, which is, now you've got to go and get a degree, oftentimes. But just tell me briefly, what, for your other friends, you seem to be doing well in boxing. Would you think that story was replicated across your friendship group?
Well, yes, because they were all getting dead-end jobs, etc., etc. Fortunately, I was an apprentice electrician. I applied, and I didn't have a problem getting a job. I waited about 6 months because when I left school at 15 years of age, uneducated as I still am, and I worked in a wood factory for 6 months while sending out letters to various different electrical companies. And I eventually got an apprenticeship at Vincent Square, southwest London. I found it a bit too far from home because I lived in Tottenham. So I then applied to a different company, A. Tyndall and Son in Enfield, and I got an apprenticeship. My parents signed indentures until the age I was supposed to finish at 21. But I was very keen and eager, and I worked hard and actually finished my apprenticeship at the age of 19. So I was a 19-year-old electrician and in charge of grown men, believe it or not, working at Chase Farm Hospital, where they had lots of nursing homes there, and I was actually in charge of adults as just a kid, really, 19-year-old kid.
Mike, just reflect yourself on, you came a bit later, you were 14. What's your sense now? Obviously, you've had a very distinguished and continue to have a distinguished career as a writer and other things, but just what's your own sense of the 70s, 60s, the story of those younger men and women, boys and girls that came, and also that second generation story that gets more complex, if you like?
Yeah, it's ambition is one of the word that you had tossed about a lot, you know. Why you go have no ambition? And actually, just having that sense that you were here to do something.
Yes.
That you weren't just here, but you here to do something, which I'm hearing from Vernon as well.
Yes.
If you talk to all of us, we all have that sense, whether we made it or not, or whether we sort of stepped up or didn't. That sense that having come here, having made that journey, having left your home, you had to do something to sort of make up for it.
I fought a fella called Walter Clayton, and he was the first fighter to put me on the floor. You know, he didn't knock me out, I lost on points, but he hit me and put me down. But funny enough, I got a return with Walter Clayton about 18 months later.
And you beat it.
This time at the Royal Albert Hall. And David, I swear to you, I gave him a good hiding. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the worst decision I've ever had in my life. When at the end of 8 terrific rounds, the referee held both our hands up and gave a draw. To this day, I swear it, it's the worst decision I've ever had in any aspect of my life. I well won the fight.
But it's your spirit that touches us all, because the truth is, some might start the sentence by saying, David, I was exploited, and you haven't said that. And some might say, David, the decision was racist, and you haven't said that. You have a quality that I do associate with not all, but part of the Caribbean, the Windrush generation. Certainly when I think of my mother, I think of this. It's a desire to see the best in people. It's a desire to move on. It's a desire to be positive. We get sometimes caricatures that don't quite capture a spirit that's always attempting to be decent in your language and the way you think of others. And I think I wanted to say that because it's come across so strongly to me in the time I've got to know you, and I hope it's coming across to this audience.
It was just my personality, you know. I used to go around and go to pubs, you know, to socialise, playing pool, etc., etc. You know, I didn't look at somebody as black or white. I just looked at the people for what was in their hearts. You know, the colour didn't matter to me. You know, that's why I was so popular and sold so many tickets. But I say not only to black people, but equally amount to whites as well. Yeah, and I went on to, as I say, to become number 14 in Europe, 9 in the Commonwealth, and number 2 in Great Britain, which, as we all know, was England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, after being told I'd never box again. So that was my determination to be successful. I thought, you know, I feel quite proud of that.
2005, you go to Jamaica.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I had a son out there. Went out to spend a bit of time with my son, and lo and behold, after a couple of years, I decided to come back and got the biggest shock of my life. I don't think I've recovered from it. You know, there's no punching in the 8 or 9 years that I was a professional boxer. All the punches put together didn't hurt as much as when I was refused entry back into the UK in 2K7. Oh.
They said you can't come back in. you can't come back in because you're not British.
Yeah.
You can't prove you're not British.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can I ask you, how did that happen? Did they write you a letter? Or?
No, I went to because I had a Jamaican passport. I'd been travelling back and forth for quite some time with the Jamaican passport, but I think they changed the law whilst I was out there, you know, and I went to the British High Commission to acquire a visa to return to the UK, but was refused it after travelling to Jamaica several times back and forth to the UK. It happened previously, in actual fact. It happened in 2K4. I don't know if you remember, but you had to get me back with the help of my sister. And, oh God, it was unbelievable. You know, they just said they weren't going to issue me a passport, a visa, because...
When the Windrush Scandal broke, you weren't in a great way in Jamaica.
No, I was homeless. I was literally homeless almost, to be honest with you, just weeks after I got there, because the lady who had my son, you know, me and her just didn't get on, you know. They got a saying in Jamaica, to see me and to live with me is a different story. Right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
You know, so when I went there, we didn't get on. So after a few weeks, I left her place, and I was on the streets, ladies and gentlemen, for years and years and years, living in derelict properties. I slept all over the place, you know, even in it's what I call ATM, even ATM machines. Slept on benches outside the police stations. It was awful. I nearly got killed once. I was sleeping in a derelict building. Somebody who I'd known for quite some time previously, who I'd often give money to, one day he lent me a few $1,000s because my ATM card got taken by one of the ATM machines. So I had no money, so I borrowed a couple of quid off of him and couldn't pay him back in time. And he came to the derelict building that I was in late at night, 11, 12 o'clock nights, with a large knife behind his back. Because it was in a field, the building was in a field, isolated from anybody. And as he woke me up, all I'm saying is God just told me to throw a punch and hit him. And I got up and I hit him, and he went back and the knife dropped out of his hand, but he went into his car and he got a machete and he tried to take my head off as well as... I can't... No, it's not on that hand. I'd have to take this all off. He tried to take my head off my body. It was severe.
Got a little dent there, yeah?
Yeah, that's... Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got chops all over my hand. I've got a long cut there. It was terrible.
Ladies and gentlemen, isn't this the most extraordinary story that should be the subject of a novel? Mike, just in your sense as a sort of historian, writer, novelist, this story that is the Windrush Scandal, when you were writing about Windrush, could you ever have foreseen this scandal? The broader context in which a great boxer is denied the right to access his own country. What's your sense of it? What's your
not
sense?
at all. When we published the first book about the Windrush, back in, it would be 1999, 2000, I thought I was writing about history. It never actually occurred to me that we were looking at the time at let's say Enoch Powell as a sort of historical figure, we were assuming that the elements that went into the way that Vernon was treated were all gone.
And around that time, I obviously became the Member of Parliament. And I'll be honest, the new Labour government came with a kind of vision for a fairer, more tolerant society, and Britain began to feel like that. The economy was working. However, I was very aware, representing Tottenham, as Bernie would have been aware, that there were a generation of second generation Windrush, and I'm thinking of my older brothers, their contemporaries, who are older than me. My older brother is now, my eldest is 61, who had been let down badly by Britain. And the government at the time didn't have a great story, didn't have an opportunity for them. They had struggled with schools, struggled with employment, and actually the story that you're telling, Vernon, of running into problems, you got to 29, 30 and things start to get bumpy, not just because of personal decisions but just making your way. That was a common theme in Tottenham, particularly for men, less so for women, I've got to say, for Windrush, but for men. And I was aware of that. Now, it strikes me that it's a deep, painful irony that it's that very same generation that you see coming up so often as those who were then smacked by Windrush, denied pension, denied health, having already experienced quite a lot of hardship. Not all of them, frankly, with the tremendous character of Vernon, always looking for the decent, always looking for the positive. So I was aware of that, but I was not aware, of course, of a sort of pernicious desire to turn those British citizens into illegal immigrants. I am going to end the conversation at this point and ask you to show your appreciation for Vernon, most particularly. Please show your appreciation.